up Mage's overall performance in Grandmasters.
Yeah, and I think we were sort of talking about this a little bit before the broadcast, trying to pinpoint, you know, is Jarla better at Mage than everyone else? Has he just been drawing the nuts? And I think the answer is a little bit from column A, a little bit from column B, right? Because he has history with Mage, where in the previous metagame, Spell Mage was a deck that I think he started off slowly with and then very rapidly afterwards grew into probably the best Spell Mage player in Grandmasters. Say that quietly in case Nalgadan hears you, but I would stand by it. And then obviously passing that up, then this transitioned into this version of the deck where now you're adding the quest, you're playing Quest Mage, but it's still essentially Spell Mage. Oh. So I'm sure a lot of that prowess carries over. However, we have watched multiple games where Jarla has played 3 or more Incanter's Flows in the early game in Mage, right? And then just ripped card draw straight after that as well. So I definitely think some of his wins with Mage have kind of been handed to him by some of the most powerful draws, but make no mistake about it, I do think he's one of the absolute best with this deck.
And if anything reinforces the fact that the European Grandmasters just know how it's done, it's Seiko getting Mule 1 in his mulligan. So there's no fear for now. We're safe from the dreaded Spectator Mule bug, for now at least. We just know how to get things done. But again, Seiko starting off very, very well there with just... this is the aggro part of the deck, I would say, when you get openings like this. But we did see Seiko keep composting as well, right? Which just goes to show he's not looking for a naturally minion-based 1-2-3, as you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. That is flow right there. That, encumbered pack mule, that's the real flow. You might think Incanter's Flow is flow, it's not. You might think SI7 Skulker in Rogue is flow, it's not. That is the single best card that you can have in your opening hand, because it means we actually get to watch some Hearthstone.
And if you think about it, it shows the development of flow itself. It used to be 2 mana, now it's 3. It's a 2-3. It just all makes sense.
Wow. Half-Life 3 confirmed.
There you go. And if you really think outside the box, Jarla does have defensive options here with the Runed Orb First Flame, or just double First Flame if he really wants. Can chuck in the 1 Thief along there as well if he wants to go that way. I just don't know if he'd want to fish with Runed Orb first, just to see what's on offer. But I guess with 1 First Flame, he can then fish with 1 Thief afterwards.
Yeah, I don't know if you're looking for, like, Runed Orb the Pack Mule into Brain Freeze, potentially, right? Because he's played Fire already at this point, and then that would give him the Arcane and Frost that he needs, but that's just such a niche out in the end that I'm not sure it's really entirely worth it. Jarla's going to endeavour to take things a little bit slower here. I think this is something that you can do in the matchup. If you just space out your resources a little bit, you will make your quest slower because of it, but you will keep control of the board for longer, which kind of trickles down and buys you those extra turns that you need to complete that quest a little bit slower.
I also think in this matchup as well that if Jarla just goes all in on trying to find Devolving Missiles, that could pay off greatly for him, because generally in this deck there are 2 cards that draw cards. There's Composting, which you can see already in Seiko's hand, applies a Death Rattle effect to your minions, and then when they die they draw cards, which guess what, if you devolve them, no card draw. And then there's Peasant a lot of the time as well, but Mage can just ping Peasant, right? Like, it's one of the classes that can deal with it in no matter the situation. So I think if he just gets a Devolving Missile somehow, he will put himself in a great spot to play even, as you mentioned, more of a control style Mage as opposed to trying to turbo out the quest to get victory that way. Tough one, right? Snap Freeze will draw him a card. Now, sorry, as opposed to going for Cone, which he has to wait a little bit to do instead.
Right. Do you think it's the worst card there by some distance, though? Cone of Cold isn't exactly ideal. You certainly don't want to be offered it twice, but it's at least a card that can give you some use. It does, of course, belong to the Frost School, and it at least can stall a board, even though it's not really going to have a significant impact on Druid boards, where basically everything has 3 health. So it's what makes Fire Sale so important overall in this deck.
Yep, no big surprise here that Second Flame's going to be used. One of the more threatening minions in the deck, of course.
The light protects me.
Seiko committing to a I would say a fairly underwhelming compost in there. That's the one you really generally see or are terrified of is like, you know, the 5, 6, 7 minion ones where you're just like, oh, I need to kill these minions because they'll kill me, but if I do, I'm just filling up my opponent's hand to let them build a board yet again.
Yeah, so this means Jarla can choose to stall the board a little bit here with some of those freeze effects using Cone of Cold. Cone of Cold, of course, will kill one minion straight up.
What to do?
And the
Well,
Vibrant Squirrel.
You could cone the mule and trade the 1/2 in.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's reasonable.
Maybe a bit too fancy, maybe not worth it, but it's something he could do, which is technically all I said.
Yep.
Could maybe try and stagger the death rattles here, so Seiko won't just have a lot of resources to play with next turn.
He's just going to choose to remove max power from the board, though, which I don't mind, honestly. I think part of this is motivated by the early game that he did see from Seiko, which was 1 Battle Guard and 1 Priestess as well, coming down very early, right? And those are the cards that you generally need. Even if you have 8 or 9 cards in your hand, you're usually limited by mana as the Druid. So you generally need those big pop-off cards to be able to do anything particularly effective. So I think because he's seen some of those big threats come down early already, he's not too afraid of giving extra cards over to Seiko because he thinks he'll be able to deal with whatever comes down. Seiko did pick up 2nd Battle Guard, which does give him some potential at least to do impactful things here, but you can kind of see the reality of what I was talking about, right? Like, even with those cards drawn, there's nothing particularly terrifying that Seiko can do this turn.
I do like this, though. Get the minions down, push a little bit of damage, clean up the board. And also just, I talked about earlier that Mage can just deal with Peasant whenever they want. It does cost mana in a lot of instances, right? There's been no flow for Jarla, so it's not like he'll have an easy way to deal with this in a lot of circumstances. Seiko's already seen 1st, 2nd Flame come down, so if this requires a ping, yes, Seiko would love to draw cards with this, but if it pulls 2 mana away from Jarla's turn, I don't think he'll be too upset. Of course, the Peasant does require drawing a card at the start of the turn, so it does have to live that first turn that's played, which is why, or one of the reasons I imagine that Jarl is just spending his time just thinking about how he wants to spend his mana this turn.
Yeah, he started the turn leaning towards the Refreshing Spring Water immediately, which I do think is guaranteed at this point. He plays 1 Thief, 1 Magtheridon, right? And he's already played the 1 Thief earlier on in the game. So he's down to 100% spells in the remainder of the deck, but he's just considering instead, I would imagine, whether he's looking at like ping Fireball this turn, right? Just to be able to clear up the threats. This essentially exchanges an entire free turn over what's happened in the last back and forth, right? The board state is exactly the same as it was before Seiko took his previous turn, so Jarla's kind of just skipped the entire game forward 1 turn.
And now I don't think Seiko has that many choices here. Probably would have actually liked the Squire to get killed this turn.
Yeah.
Just to cycle through, but I think he just throws everything on board. I don't think there's any need to overthink this. The squirrels do help. Death rattles help fill up the board again. So it combines with composting as well, that if you get them on squirrels or when squirrels are in the deck, it's quite likely that you're going to get some back on board for the next turn. But Jarla seems to be in a reasonable position again, just to buy himself a little bit more time. Especially if he can do it whilst keeping this Squire alive. I think that would be goal number 1 for him here.
Interesting diversion already. Jarla chose, after the first Spring Water, he chose to... Okay, no, he's going to go Spring Water. But it looked like for a second he diverted to going Arcane into Frost to then complete step 2 of the quest, which would give him the Discovery spell. But even doing that, he still has like Fire Sail mana at this point, right? Even after playing the second Spring Water. So I was struggling to think of something he would want to discover here that he would rather spend that mana on than the Refreshing Spring Water anyway. So in the end, I think he came out with the order that I agree with. I'm just curious where his head was at previously when he was looking like he was going to discover the spell first.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I even wonder if he's going to actually fireball the Battle Guard here, just because it's the biggest minion on board right now that isn't frozen, of course.
Oh, you
get it?
No, no! Jarla, not you as well! You're supposed to be the one that's immune from this. The rest of the ropers in HSGM have been actually roping. You and Bunny are supposed to have it down. Honestly, Raven.
Not good, is it? It's not good.
No.
Especially because it would have actually finished off a great turn, honestly. Like, freeze two of the minions out, kill. I was talking about fireball in the Battle Guard, which is the amount I respect the card, of course. Seiko now going to do a cool play here with the Orc Merchant to kill the Squire to give him another card draw, but wasn't really what he's after. He's still got 2 Arbor Ups in the deck, which I think right now, other than maybe Composting as well, are probably just the best 3 cards left in his deck to draw.
Sands of time run low.
He's still got several satisfied squirrels in there as well, which could have been coming out. Like, he could have drawn, you know, squirrel token into Arbor Up, something like that, like something to end up being very threatening here. But it's just not hitting it right now for Seiko.
One good thing for Seiko, though, is I think he's fairly confident there's no Fire Sale in Jarla's hand. Because with the flurry last turn, that seemed like a very Fire Sale style board.
I wonder.
No board space right now for a Magtheridon clear, even if that were relevant, which it very rarely is here. But of course, Magtheridon does require the spaces on board to be present for the warders to be summoned before you're able to get a big clear. Not super relevant in this position because if Jarla would be able to kill 3 1/3 warders, he can probably just clear this board anyway.
Right.
So it wouldn't have ended up being super relevant. But what did become very relevant very quickly there is that Fire Sale draw.
And with Hot Streak as well. Just how he wants to do this. I think he was looking at ways to actually kill off the Teacher's Pet first somehow, but I don't think there's a great way to do that. So he probably has to just be happy with this and then see if Brain Freeze can get the job done.
Don't think he's necessarily even going to get to see what this Teacher's Pet minion is, though. Yeah, it wouldn't have mattered even if he didn't. Drops out the Thalnos.
Ooh. And this is where it starts to fall over just a little bit.
Yep.
Without second composting, and honestly not a great first one. This is where you can drop off a little bit with this deck. Normally you would have liked to have won the game by now in most outcomes.
Yeah, at the very least, and I do mean the very least, he got to draw the card from the Blood Mage while having a Far Watch Post in play, but that is not going to be of any real relevance. With Dawngrasp hitting the board, Brain Freeze still available to clear this up. I mean, this is a real decision, it has to be said, about which of these 2 minions you end up killing. He is going to disrespect the Watch Post in the end, which I think is reasonable, but with Cram Session in hand, I could certainly understand not wanting your cards to be specifically increased. Even with the Annoyatron draw that could potentially protect that Watch Post, stop the big power draws coming through, Seiko decides, no, all right, you've shown me enough, good enough, you take this one down. And I think unfortunate for Seiko there, because I think he would have been hopeful at the very least coming into that game number 1 with the Druid going up against the Mage, that he would have had a decent chance of coming out on top there. But even though he got a kind of decent aggro curve, that's kind of what I was talking about, right? Is a lot of the best draws for Druid aren't traditional aggro curves, and Seiko just kind of drew a traditional aggro curve, and Jarla was just able to deal with it, piloting Mage as a control deck, essentially, in this situation, getting to the point where just the greater density of late game threats in his deck took over, running the aggro deck out of resources.
Yeah, I think the lack of a lot of squirrels coming out early on from the Death Rattle, of course, combined with a kind of mediocre composting in the early game, just added to that. Well, yeah, you run out of resources. That's why you play those cards to help out with that. But Jarla had just enough to keep going there. I'm just going to have a quick check. Does mean Jarla's going to be moving on to his warrior in this next matchup, which is going to be that big warrior that I've actually been playing a little bit of on ladder, and other than the mage matchup, I feel pretty confident about a lot of things. I think the deck's generally very, very strong right now.
I'm just happy to have a deck called Big back in the metagame because it just brings me endless enjoyment. Generally, the way these things go is over time we will now start referring to Pirate Warrior as Little Warrior and Control Warrior as Medium Warrior. That's generally how these things pan out. Hopefully that will catch on, but I'm happy to see Big Warrior back alive and kicking in the metagame because it is a deck that shakes things up a little bit in terms of the metagame that we were dealing with before. It kind of inserts itself into a few matchups, gives a couple of decks a few things to worry about that they didn't have before, looking at Garrote Rogue in particular, with this deck kind of being designed top to bottom to give that deck serious issues. Big threats that kill you quickly with Troublemaker and Rattlegore, and then ability to resist the maximum combo damage from the opponent with Heavy Plate, Moarg, Forge Fiend, and Bulwark of Azeroth to be able to shut those things down. So I do think this is a very interesting deck to take a spot in the metagame. However, one thing that it isn't necessarily fully equipped to deal with is just these huge board pushes, because in order to make room for minions, particularly when you're playing extra minions over the bare minimum, which, you know, the bare minimum tends to be one Rattlegore and two Troublemakers. Yep. Oh, I'd love to play two Rattlegores. But once you start fitting in Moarg Forge Fiends or Scrapyard Colossus, it's generally Brawls and Rankers and Blade Storms that you're cutting out of the deck to make room for those things, which kind of decreases your ability to fight off these board-based matchups.
Yeah, I will say, though, just in this list from Jarla, he has 2 minefields, which are absolutely huge in the early game, of course, in this matchup. Still 2 sword and board, still 2 shield slam. He has 2 blade storms, 2 rancors, and 1 brawl. So one of those brawls that you would see a little bit has been cut, of course, but generally, I mean, there's a minefield straight away. But generally, the combination of minefield early and honestly Bladestorm feels like it generally lines up against Druid pretty well to at least clear the majority of the board.
It drew a card, Raven. Look at that. That's just the juice.
How much mana is that card even worth now? Probably infinity. 1 mana, 1/2, drew a card. Done. Now if it draws 2, I think we have to stop the match.
I mean, Jarla only had himself to blame. He could have subjected the peasant to the minefield, which does seem incredibly cruel, but it could have been done.
Yeah, with effective 7 health on the board now, this minefield's looking a little bit worse.
Yeah. I think reasonable, though. I think Jarla was living in the expectation that maybe the play was just an on-curve 2-3, which is a large quantity of the deck, right? Pack Mule, Watch Post can come down in that spot. There's
Brawler.
That right. Boneshura Brawler as well as the other one. Yes, thank you. So, like, the most expected play on that position is a 2-3 just to support that 2-1, at which point Minefield would have got a hell of a lot better. He could have supported that by cycling the Heavy Plate as well back into the deck to fill out the mana. But it just so happened that because Seiko had one of the cheat cards with the Battle Guard, he was able to get far more stats into play.
I think you just do the minefield anyway to kill the peasant, or try to kill the peasant, should I say, right? Because...
Yep.
Okay, yeah, he's going to go for it. Okay. He did get Fishy Flyer as well, which he can play next turn, which is a big deal. Oh no. Where's my emergency button?
Does he know? That's the question. Does he know?
We can play Oracle and Pack Mule.
Correct.
Hopefully, not break the Spectator. Could even coin out Squire as well.
You could. The interesting thing, though, is if you don't, you have access to Coin Arbor up the next turn, which is quite exciting.
Yeah,
right?
that's true. That does excite me.
Curious.
You're right.
But obviously the Squire would also get doubled this turn by playing the Oracle down. It's just, you kind of have to think of breakpoints in terms of mana and removal from your opponent, right? Like, what does Bladestorm do? What does Rancor do? What do I do on the turn before my opponent might be able to brawl? Even though that's less of a concern because Jarla is only playing a one-up. I think having access to Coin Arbor up means you get to do a ton of damage before a brawl can happen, right? Which is quite interesting.
Yeah. No, that's very fair.
And so Seiko did play the wrong one, so I apologize. We have now broken the spectator. We will get back to this as soon as possible, but I have already played around this by reconnecting in advance, so I can still see what's going on and can hopefully give you some much needed radio commentary if this is an extended delay here.
And I believe it's not. We fixed it.
Hey, good work, everyone.
Professional going on here. So heavy play is going to be cycled into a minefield. Okay. Problem is, it's still limiting what Jarla has access to this turn. Obviously, just not enough mana. And again, this is where the Druid deck really excels here from Seiko. Is it spends more mana than it should be allowed, which means your opponent's responses are normally not good enough because they're limited by the constraints of more human levels of mana.
Oh no, don't do it. I don't want to go back. Please don't play a fishy flyer. No! Yeah, I think it has to be the play in the end, though. Even like Bladestorm there was only going to kill the 1 health minions. It doesn't even really set you up for a minefield on the following turn. Coin Arbor up would still have been devastating, even if you'd have used the Bladestorm. So I think in the end, with none of the removal really being appropriate, playing the minion is just the only real viable play that Jarla had. It wasn't a good play, but it was the only one that made any sense. This is just going back to my talking point at the start, where I was like, you have to cut out some removal to make room for extra minions, and that can mean you get punished by these board-based matchups. That can sound ridiculous when you start saying, well, but there's still minefields, there's still rankers, there's still Bladestorms. None of those are universal removals, right? Like, Brawl is by far the most universal removal for board-based aggro decks in your deck, because every minion in Druid has at least 2 health, basically, so it plays around Ranker naturally. That also naturally plays around the minefield as well, just by having high health totals in play. And then it's very easy to just manipulate different breakpoints with an Argent Squire or a 4 health minion or a Teacher's Pet or whatever else, so that Bladestorm doesn't line up naturally either. So I do think the lack of a second Brawl might be something working in Seiko's favor right now.
And Seiko making a slightly strange looking trade, I think, there. But it was just to manage more of what the numbers look like on board. So now there's 2 health minions, 2 4, 2 3, and a 5.
The health totals marched in 2 by 2. Yeah.
And you can see really well what you talk about, right? Like Bladestorm, generally you'd think, oh, Bladestorm, like, okay, great. Like, this should kill a fair few. Oh, wait, it kills 2 minions here. But does he just have to Bladestorm Minefield and just hope? Bulwark could get used up this turn easily. Would buy him a turn, but at what cost, right? Like, what's the draw? Unless he draws exactly Brawl next turn, is that even worth?
So the Bladestorm play would leave 2 health minions, 2 1 health minions, that's 6 health, and a 3 health minion. So 9 health minions, 9 health in total, which means you'd be looking to hit like precisely the 2 1 health minions you've left behind, right? To be getting out of this.
One.
Doesn't do that, yep, then that happens, and he dies, and he concedes. Seiko squares up the series.
I do think it was the right choice, though, and a good effort, right? If he did get that second hit, then at least there's some kind of plan. But as you can see, the deck just overwhelmed Jarla there, and just although he did have access to removal, none of it lined up well enough, because Seiko was just not only playing the taunt minions for free, because they were 2 mana ones, I think, throughout that game, but also just getting the duplicate effect. So, like, playing 2 taunt minions for the price of none, basically, at that point, and the board was just way too much. Facing down this on turn 5 when you've already been pushed for 14, it's a big ask to respond to that, as you obviously said, only really Brawl was going to ever answer.
Yeah, and means we series squared up now. It does mean that Jarla still has his warrior to win with, still has his druid to win with, which is interesting as well. It's not something we've talked about yet this series, but it is full Cthulhu Miracle Druid with Celestial Alignment Anaconda thrown in, which is quite unfashionable these days, it has to be said. It does seem like more and more people have switched over to Anaconda Druid with just the Anaconda and the Claw Machine thrown in there as minions and more of the token-based strategy with the big, very, very focused on just big Anaconda pop-off turns. And I think, personally, that's something that I came around to as well, where the spread of the matchups really came in. But it does kind of suggest that Jarla is looking at more of a pure anti-control strategy with his decks overall, right? If you break it down, he does have the Mage in there as well, which is fantastic as an anti-control deck. I think having the Cthulhu version of Druid makes that function as an almost perfect anti-control deck. And then obviously if you take, for example, Warrior out of the equation, his other two decks, Big Warrior and Rogue, tend to make a lot of sense in that regard as well. So it's an interesting way to go from Jarla. It's not something that we've seen a great deal of over the last couple of weeks, the Cthulhu version of the Druid, but interesting now as to the dynamic that we get between a few of the combo-based decks that Seiko still has left to play with and some of the tools that Jarla does have available, because Jarla has a lot of armor gain remaining in his two remaining decks between the Cthulhu Druid and the Big Warrior, right?
Yeah, he really does, but we have seen this OTK Demon Hunter do quite silly things, not only just today, but just in general. The quest has really helped it out in just getting those quick turnover reduction turns. If those hit very well, then anything's possible, but also just the fact that just getting Kurtrus again fairly safely down can be a big deal. But again, in this matchup, because it's the Celestial Druid, it does mean that, as we've seen very often in the past, that if the Celestial Alignment is played, then suddenly your 5 mana quest reward doesn't quite cut it, as well as never even talking about the fact is how well Demon Hunter can proc the quest with only access to 1 mana at a time effectively. So big questions have to be asked in this matchup. That's going to be Jarla's Miracle Druid here, or Celestial, whatever you want to call it. And this is a deck that he specifically has stuck to for a while, I think. I don't really think he's been playing too much of the Amort Anaconda. Is that what we're going for? I thought you were just going to tell me that's the way to say Anaconda, and I've been saying it wrong, because just add it to the list at this point. But yeah, Jarla is one of the players I believe we do have in the European Grandmasters that once he finds a deck he's happy with, he will just keep playing it until it literally falls over and does not work anymore. It seems to be paying off for him so far.
I mean, based on how long he was playing various versions of Control Warlock in the past, even long beyond the point where it has fallen over.
He did keep winning, though.
He will. Well, did he? He kind of got Hunter Ace relegated by convincing him to play Control Warlock all the time.
Did he miss top 8, though?
Yeah, good point. All right, good point. Well made. Fair enough. Jarla is definitely someone that we perhaps don't give enough credit for having pet decks, right? Because we've talked about it with like Frenetic, with Face Hunter. We talk about how, maybe Seiko, Viper, those kind of people are very well known for being a little bit unconventional. I think Jarla is as well, right? And I think we look at previous season where he was very fixated on the 8 sticky finger lineup, right? When he submitted that multiple times, really fell in love with doing that as a strategy. Control Warlock we were just talking about previously, he was a huge fan of through multiple different iterations. Now I think Mage is a real comfort zone for him, the Spell Mage previously and now the Quest Mage. Certainly, I've talked about this before, it feels like he's a player that really does improve through absorbing data. So, once he has 200, 300 games of a particular version of a deck under his belt, it's a lot for him to then switch to a different version of the deck, right? Or a different deck entirely, because he then feels he has to play 200, 300 more games to catch up with the level that he's already at with that deck to begin with. So I think him sticking with decks is something that works out very, very well for him, because even if his deck lists aren't optimal, his level of play makes up for it a lot of the time.
Yeah, I do think he's a great player as well when it comes to absorbing mana, as he has Wild Growth, Overgrowth, Bloom, Innovate, Coin. He threw away an Overgrowth in his opening hand. There's another Innovate. Pretty much maxed out mana just in the hand there. He's just going to get to it. So everything lining up okay for Jarla, but maybe there is such too much of a good thing is possible here.
Yeah, if it is possible, it is this hand that we're looking at right now, because this needs some meat, some steak to go with the sizzle right now.
Seiko on the other side, not really offered great discoveries there.
Probably just Stelina, I would imagine.
I think so. just painful because he might make the choice of actually just playing it as tempo, depending on what he gets next turn. But it does hurt because in Druid, if you can throw away their Celestial, then that you know that's likely to be gone at least for a short term, right? If you can get it done, and it might buy you a little bit more time.
Yep. Double coin here, or coin bait, I suppose, into Overgrowth. Almost always correct to do this kind of thing. You just turned 2 temporary mana into 2 permanent mana. Also, Jarla, as expected, doing the little things right, using a coin instead of the other Innovate, since that's the card that Seiko knows he has in his hand. Not a common mistake to see at this level, but sometimes you will see players just play Innovates and hold on to a coin, and obviously that's wrong, because you're just revealing information to your opponent that you don't need to.
And do you think in this matchup with that Magtheridon pick that Seiko, again, if this opportunity came up, would go Magtheridon into, use a Fell Screen Blast, use some spell damage, and just get Magtheridon board ASAP if he has the opportunity?
I would expect to see that, yeah, as long as it can happen early enough, right? I think, although this is a slightly different matchup than the one we saw between Viper and Frenetic, the dynamic is very much the same, and I think it's time-gated, right? Where there's a few turns at the start where if you can just get Magtheridon down on curve, you want to use it to pressure. If you miss that window, then suddenly you want to use that Magtheridon as more clearing potential later on. But I think if you have the option to play a 12-12 on curve, you should probably do it.
Well, decisions can be made now. He does have the Guild Trader and Fell Screen Blast next turn to do this with. It's expensive, but it's there. It's a 12-12 guaranteed. Okay, well, maybe not guaranteed, right? Because technically Jarla could Celestial next turn, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
Choosing instead to take the guaranteed quest progress, which he did have available to him as well. Guild Trader gave him 2 basically guaranteed options, right? One was the Magtheridon, one was the quest completion. He chose to go with the quest line instead. I am far from industrial-sized cooling equipment of this play. Not a big fan, if you needed that.
Oh, I was like, is Convinced like a cooling equipment brand or something? I'm supposed to just randomly know?
Job's done.
Oh,
yeah, I think for me, I would have been going with the 12-12 route. Obviously, I'm not saying that that's a play that just wins because Druid can't kill a 12-12, because although Druid can't kill a 12-12, if they have the hand that you are afraid of when you make the play that Seiko is playing here, they just ignore your 12-12 and just blow through it over the course of the game, right? And just get too much counter pressure with Celestial Alignment and so on. It's worth noting, of course, that in this version of the deck, there is an additional punish, and it's a punish that is in Jarla's hand, but I'm trying to ignore that fact and make an honest call. The Maw of Cthulhu as a one-off can just kill the 12-12 and completely ruin your game plan on the other side, but of course, that is a one-off answer in the deck that is available to Jarla's deck that was not available to Frenetic's.
And as usual, I'll even out our pairing, saying, yes, Seiko just played around the Maw. It was really good, because Jarla has it in hand.
Pleasure doing business.
They call him Captain Caster Vision over here.
Been calling me that for years.
Yep.
Nothing really coming together for Seiko with this hand, is there? It's fine because he's progressing the quest, but after the turn Jarla just had, even from Seiko's view, so no Caster Vision going on, it mustn't feel great for Seiko, right? Just leading up to this, seeing what Jarla did last turn, and knowing there's been some cards drawn, there's tons of mana been ramped. Yes, he's overloaded, but now Jarla can choose to actually bloom out Celestial if he really wants to. And the question with that is, does he bloom Shuffle Celestial?
That is a good question.
Right?
First question, should he do it at all?
Mm-hmm.
I think yes, probably. Because the fear is 2 quest steps complete, Sigil in play. That's terrifying, right? Because you don't want your opponent to hit Kurtrus and then you play Celestial Alignment after the fact. You very much want to do it before the fact. So even if they can then complete quest, they have to wait until they creep back up naturally to 5 mana to play the 5 mana Kurtrus that they have available to. I do think cycling the turtles in the end was the correct decision as well. But crucially, it's, I wouldn't say rare, it's uncommon that this is the correct play to leave yourself an overloaded Celestial Alignment turn, so you essentially time skip your next turn entirely. But I do think in this position it is the right decision to make. But Seiko has some very exciting options here, which I think my co-partner is very eager to tell you about.
Il'gynoth, go!
Yeah, it's pretty good, right?
Is it Il'gynoth Moarg and just go?
Yeah.
It's insane.
It's not bad. You have to break down lots of options here, right? Because
No.
No. So you have to break down lots of options that involve Tempo Il'gynoth this turn, right? And work out what the best way to do this is, how much damage you eventually cash out. Because you could also do something like Tempo Il'gynoth, play a Sigil, and then say, well, what if that Sigil hits me more spell damage or another Moarg or a Philosophy, right, on the following turn? Does that then represent more damage for me over the course of several turns? Because that now draws me another 0 mana card that I can weave in with 2 whole mana on the following turn.
Yeah.
I think this is complicated, but I think it does involve a potential Il'gynoth hitting the board this turn.
I think at first glance, like Il'gynoth Moarg, and then there's potential of Guild Trader Fellscream Blast. You can look at what you draw afterwards, but Seiko is going to go a little bit slower at least. Actually just play out a 4-3 instead and just go full sort of minion aggro style.
Okay, end turn. Seiko now has 2 mana. He's pushing 12 with just what he has in play, so he has to deal 15.
We can do
Cannot
18.
do with the current hand.
It's one of the reasons why I was looking at just getting either the Moarg or Guild Trader on board instead of this, because you've done a huge buff to your actual damage with Il'gynoth if you don't have to spend mana for it this turn.
Right. So yeah, if he had Guild Trader in play this turn, right, he'd be pushing 1 less. So Jarla would be at 16 here. But then he
Go
could
Moarg
go
Fell.
Moarg Fell on 3 targets.
Time grows short.
For 18, right?
Hang on. Yes.
Wouldn't have that just been lethal? Am I missing something?
Well, this is why I'm not overly bothered about which one of the 2 he went for, but the fact he just played a 4-3 with Il'gynoth was the thing that confused me the most. So yeah, I think this just opened a bit of a window. I don't think needed to be there.
Yeah, shake of the head from Seiko. I think he's got this woefully wrong.
Look like you love a good deal.
Oh, and there's more of Cthulhu. Now there's Armageddon, there's turtles, there's everything you could ever want. So now is the backup plan, weirdly, for Seiko to play Magtheridon and hope this Guild Trader lives next turn so he can Magtheridon Fellscream? And just try and do the final push?
Sure, I can see that, yeah.
Without Il'gynoth, what else has he got at this point?
Right. Yeah, I think he is pretty much down to Magtheridon as a win condition at this point. Which means Jarla here might even decide, weirdly enough, that dealing 4 to the spell damage is actually securing him more health in the long run, which actually I think is superb recognition of the situation. It feels very, very strange. With Il'gynoth gone, there are very few worlds where you think removing spell damage is important. So I think Jarla has identified one very important one in this scenario, which is actually just the contents of his opponent's hand.
And also, not playing Best in Shell onto the board, right? Because if he'd gone Best in Shell instead and said, oh, well, these can tank the 2 minions. Well, yes, they can, but then Magtheridon eats them up. And then Jarla's on the top deck to actually try and make something that stops him being just hit for 12 next turn. That was a really good choice there from Jarla, honestly. There is still now ways for Seiko to actually get the Magtheridon anyway, but Jarla can then just drop Best in Shell and I think reliably soak 2 turns, right? I think that's a fair expectation at this point in the game.
Time grows short.
Seems that way, yeah, and I think this is the only option he really has at this point, is just to turn every possible card in his deck into damage in any way that he possibly can. This isn't card draw from Illidari Studies anymore. This is minions in play and damage. That's what he needs to be dealing in right now.
Looks like Jarla might have to be happy with Best in Shell. I guess his question now is it Solar Best in Shell? Or is it Best in Shell and then have Gadget Zan Solar X next turn to try and do something with?
Or is it just play your hand this turn? Right, which I think is another option.
Yep, that is very, very fair as well.
Because it can, like, you know, you could go Auctioneer Solar here and then suddenly just hit the nuts off the top and divert entirely, right? Like, it gives you options, it gets another 4 in play.
Time waits for no one.
Yeah, I guess I'm on the more negative side of things and think if there's some way the board gets cleared, then you are 1 card off the top in a dream. But yeah, you're right, this gives him options, and at worst, this happens, which isn't a bad outcome. Wait a minute.
Seiko does have clear plus a 12/12 available this turn.
Demons? Demons.
Crucially timed, because 1 turn further down the line, he would be running into alignment number 2 from Jarla's side, and then he would be in trouble trying to get him clear down with Magtheridon. The second alignment is quite often even more brutal than the first.
Release me, and I will grant you a merciful death.
Yep, nicely recognized. Makes the trades first to clear a board space, as I was talking about previously in the Druid matchup. That was essential to get the 3 warders to even summon here. He's then going to use the Immo and the Fellscream Blast. That clears the board. This also preserves the Moarg. He chose to use an extra removal spell instead of a Moarg, and I think that gives him the luxury of just having additional Moarg for flexibility. Also gave him the option of just playing the Moarg after the fact, so it was in play as another minion that could have attacked. It's pretty interesting.
Okay. So, Body, Anacondra, Celestial. And then just pray. Jarla probably considering, is it too scary to play the Anacondra and hope it lives, or he could just hold it and try and play it next turn, but without any backup or guaranteed, I think he almost has to just play it on board, right, and just hope for the best. Yeah,
and I think, like, weirdly, with where this game is, it's a very unconventional game of Druid versus Demon Hunter. If he can use the Anacondra stats in play to help him kill the 12/12 next turn, he probably just wins on fatigue at that point, right? Like, if both decks do absolutely nothing for the rest of the game, which is about the sum total of what Seiko has left to do.
Yeah, I mean, and then Jarla's just on a Cenarium Ward at that point, right? And just wins the game off the back and not has to worry about Magtheridon.
Right, so I'm kind of like, I'm saying if you kill the 12/12, you can kind of imagine that Jarla has nothing to do in his deck and he probably still wins at that point, but of course he does. So like priority number 1 is just kill the 12/12.
I grow impatient.
What do you even do? I think this was the reservation of the Moarg from Seiko as well. I think this is what he had in mind, is being able to use Moarg, Fellscream, Immo, more spell damage off the top, some combination of that to deal with a taunt, so 12/12 connected face. And it's a plan that actually would have been rewarded with lethal if it weren't for the second alignment coming down that turn.
Yep.
I think Seiko actually had this second setup with the Magtheridon very right. Just ran into the punish on the other side.
Yeah, he's going to glide. Has the benefit of it's not outcasted, so it does mean that Jarla isn't going to draw cards here and Seiko is. But still, Quest doesn't matter. Kurtrus, not unimportant in every single way here. There's
Oh!
Scenario Ward.
The void.
It's still 12 though. That's not it.
Oh,
That's not it.
he needed something more.
He
Anything
needed
more.
Taunt, Rush, something to be able to take down the 12-6 with the Anacondra. Seiko in the end, shake of the head, cradling himself in his chair. I think he understands that maybe he made that game a little bit more difficult than he needed to do in the mid-game, but I do think he recovered, right? I don't think there was any real tilt that came into play. There was visible emotion, of course, but visible emotion and tilt are not the same thing because he readjusted. And the second setup there with the Magtheridon, as I mentioned, I think he got absolutely correct in terms of what played around the most outs from the opponent, even though those outs did not materialize and he still got hit with the second alignment. In the end, he kind of stumbled over the finish line more than parading over it. So I think it would have been a lovely finish to see a guaranteed tempo Il'gynoth lockout against a overloaded Celestial alignment turn, right? I think that would have been a very, very smooth finish to a game. But in the end, Seiko did still get there, did still pick up the much needed win with the OTK Demon Hunter. And you've got to say, anytime you pick up a victory with a Demon Hunter against a Celestial Druid, on reflection, you will be happy that happened.
Yes.
You are upset with the method that you got there with.
And most importantly as well, this has flipped the series on its head, at least for me, Sotil, because it means Seiko has Quest Mage against either Druid or Warrior, and I can see Jarla has actually decided to queue his Warrior now, and this is a horrible matchup. I mentioned earlier, I've been playing Warrior, and typically ran into Mage a lot on ladder, and honestly the only way I have managed to win is literally get a lot of the time it was actually like coin grunt into it dying into like Troublemaker, and then I would have say another grunt or commencement into Troublemaker or Rattlegore, you know, like that kind of get the minions out literally as fast as they can possibly be played and hope they hit face enough, because I don't like to oversimplify matchups, but that feels as simple as it kind of is in this one.
Now, we did see this matchup played out. I say played out
Played count.
very loosely. Yeah, I'm being a little bit liberal with my use of the English language there, between Gabby and Jarla. Gabby had the minimum number of threats playing Warrior, so I think had zero chance of actually being able to pressure down the mage in that scenario. Chose instead to play nothing for the entire game, make the quest as difficult as possible to complete on the other side, and just maximize armor over time before playing a single threat over the course of the game. Jarla, on the other hand, has the extra 2 Moog Forge Fiend in his deck that the bare bones minion version of the deck does not have access to. So interested to see how that changes things, because I do think the more threats, the better, right? The more threats, the more likely you are to actually get something to stick and attack your opponent.
Yes. For me, I've been playing a list that has the same amount of threats as Jarla, but it's one of the... oh no, what's the name of the card? The 7/7. The taunt.
Scrappy Boy.
One Scrappy Boy, sorry, official name. Yeah. It was one Scrappy Boy and one Forge Fiend in the list I was playing. And honestly, the biggest thing that was important for me with the higher number of minions was that Grunt can hit more reliably. Yes. Right? Like, that's what the outcome was for me, because to me it was all about speed. Even if you play, like, if you chain from turn 8, say, just Troublemaker, Rattlegore, whatever, just chain the minions out, I felt like Mage still had the ability to freeze and then just kill you in that amount of time in a lot of outcomes. But really just guaranteeing a Grunt can get job done, or even the commencements have good targets, is very important.
Yeah, I agree. Certainly with the minion-like version of the deck, you do get into these situations, like even a hand like this, right? Like, your first commencement hits a grunt, and then you also draw the other grunt, something like that, and then you're just like, well, some of these cards, these commencements and grunts, are no longer doing anything at this point already, right? And it's turn 6, it's turn 7 or whatever, so you can certainly run into that trap. But by just adding a couple of extra minions, obviously you gain percentage in places, but I've already talked about where you lose that percentage, right? If you're cutting a brawl, you are obviously losing some percentage in certain matchups, as we have already seen.
Here though, Seiko gets that relatively reasonably timed flow on turn 5. But there's Grunt. This is what I said that needs to happen. Now Seiko has the choice if he wants to flurry this or wait and let it hit him in the face, kill it himself, freeze the next thing. These are all options, because one thing you have to bear in mind is you can't just leave a grunt and be like, oh, I'm okay with it being a 6-2 and not a troublemaker, because Jarla has Shield Slam, has Sword and Board, has Minefield, right? Has ways to kill it himself, which means you can't just say, I'll let this grunt hit me forever.
I mean, also, it's just a 6-2, right? Like, we've talked about this dynamic before. If it was a 2-6, it would be an entirely different animal, and you'd see a lot more ignoring of the minion. And a minion like that with a death rattle that really punishes your opponent for it going off, having high attack is, I think, the way that you would want it to be in most scenarios as the player in control of the grunt.
Time runs out on me.
Good thing here, though, is he has managed to freeze the Forge Fiend. He knows now, obviously, it didn't pull a Troublemaker, which is, I think, priority number 1. You don't want it to pull Troublemaker, because that can be the most awkward to deal with over time. Oh, wow, okay. Interesting. Seiko actually highly valuing getting Dawn Grasp ready to go next turn over retaining good freeze effects, which... there's an argument for, right? I'm not even saying he's wrong. I'm just saying there's an argument either way, I think.
Oh, that's slow. That is slow.
Can
We
confirm.
talked about it. 6-2s are fine, but they're not a troublemaker. They're not a Rattlegore.
And I think
Jarla decides now's the time to get the attack in because there is no punish for it here. Really, all the not attacking was about was trying to delay quest, right? By not allowing a second ice barrier to be played because the first one's already equipped.
And in a roundabout way, because the quest has been procced and done, he will probably need Bulwark of Azeroth soon. So
Yes.
you may as well get those swings in so he can equip the Bulwark and at least buy himself, I think, like, on average, a turn and a half, maybe 2, depending on whether you've Corsair cashed it or not.
Wow, just insta-donked him with the Ignite. Okay.
Is to make space for all these cram sessions, Sol. Since 2 cram sessions, 1/1 mana, 1/2, when you have Dawn Grasp down. Oh.
Yeah, Spring Water to throw into that as well.
Really like him not proccing the shield with the first flame here. Let the grunt live. What do I say? No shield slam, which would have been perfect. This, I believe, guarantees a... oh, no, it's Forge Fiend or Troublemaker?
1 Forge Fiend, 1 Troublemaker.
Yeah, for the commencement, of course, I'm talking about.
Yes.
You didn't get anything significant from the rush options either.
And what is significant from the rush options at that point?
I guess it's a bit different now, but generally you're looking for Kargath if you get it early, because then these grunts and so on can pull out the prime, which is really strong. Same with commencement. That's one good one. I've had a lot of success, and I think you saw it because it was in testing with Broom and Grunt. That's a really good combo. But yeah, in general, at this point in the game against Mage, I don't even know what you're looking for, honestly.
Yeah, I think even then, the Kargath example I do definitely agree with, but it almost has to be like studies on 1, play Kargath.
Oh, on curve, yeah.
And
100%.
then, you know, your commencement gets you Kargath Prime into their quest reward Varden, right? Because that's going to be about the only minion that you get to rush into over the course of the whole game anyway.
Yeah, and just the fact that it's a 10-10, right, is just big, right? Like, it normally takes more than 1 spell to kill it.
True.
What to do? What to do?
Here, Seiko might be... I'm not even going to say regretting the use of the flurry, but maybe wishing he had another flurry knocking about in his hand as well. He can still go for the fire sale to clear up the majority of this. The grunt still doesn't die, so it doesn't summon another minion yet.
Mm-hmm.
He just needs to make space in hand for some card draw. Maybe he should just proc the grunt, because he can likely kill it.
Release me, and I will grant you a merciful death.
You're gonna...
Time runs out on me.
You can just proc the grunt and then fire sale, right?
if he used the... Well, how would he proc the grunt for 0 mana? Because he has to pay 4 for the fire sale?
Sorry, man. He could first flame the shield off it, and then... Wouldn't the grunt death rattle go off first?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah. No, that makes sense. Right. Same deal. Still pulls together a board clear in the end.
Seiko will have to have the Bulwark of Azzinoth in mind, so he knows he can't... Oh! Always far left, yes, okay.
Why do they always get it in this matchup?
I summoned that, I'm sure I
Every
did.
time.
I uttered the words of, oh, you know, got to have Bulwark in mind, so he needs a plan to be able to deal with it, or at least survive long enough to deal with it. Boom, Mask of Cthulhu, let's go.
I think every rogue game we've seen it's happened.
Yeah.
Every mage game we've seen it's happened when there's been Bulwark coming down. Super strange. It just seems to appear every single time. There's not that many boxes that get opened by either of those decks. It just always seems to appear. Yeah, good enough. Good enough for Jarla. He is going to give it up. He tried to save himself some time in the end there. That was the problematic matchup. Raven was talking about it earlier where he said he'd flipped the series because it's now Quest Mage going up against either the Druid or the Warrior. Not entirely true. If it was Quest Mage against either the Druid or the Warrior, then it wouldn't necessarily be a big deal. It was Quest Mage against both the Druid and the Warrior. And in that equation, the sticking point is the Warrior, and Jarla tried to lead out with it, just kind of get it over with, put himself out of his own misery, just could not get there. This matchup is so difficult to win.
And I think this was a really reasonable display of the matchup because Jarla didn't whiff, right? I mean, okay, arguably the troublemaker in the opening hand, but his grunts came out quickly. He summoned his big minions on the board, like everything lined up okay. He had the Bulwark, obviously we could see the Mask, but in general, the game plan from the Warrior was reasonable. It did what the deck is built to do, but just against Mage, it just doesn't work 9 times out of 10. But there we see the outcome of Group B. J4, of course, taking victory 2-0 yesterday, which means he's going to be playing tomorrow, and now Seiko making it through as well. So Seiko's got to, more chances of just pushing himself up the leaderboard potentially, especially if he can grab another win. And even outside of whether the points are going to make huge sweeping impacts on the players or specific